Really, election season dawning upon us. Well and truly, we're going from one electoral state to another, from Bengal to Tamil Nadu to now Kerala, where again a political storm has escalated, this time over the Jamaat-e-Islami in Kerala, after senior CPIM leader A.K. Balan claimed that if the Congress-led UDF came to power, then the Home Department would be handled by the Jamaat-e-Islami. Speaking in Palakkad, Mr. Balan said that such a situation would lead to not just one or two Marad-style riots, but also alleged that the IUML, which is a junior partner in the UDF, and the RSS were taking positions that would actually facilitate these riots. The remark drew sharp reactions from Kerala leader of the opposition, V.D. Satheeshan, who said that the left leader's remarks were akin to the BJP and Sangh Parivar strategy to create divide between the majority and minority communities. He further went on to say that the agenda of the BJP and the RSS were to use Balan's statement to trigger anti-Muslim sentiments for electoral gains. Kerala BJP chief Rajiv Chandrasekhar said that this is a dangerous trend in Kerala politics, contending that this was a symbol of growing influence of radical organizations like the PFI, SDPI, Jamaat-e-Islami. He also said that it's the same ideology that now controls the Congress party. Now, the Congress-led UDF has had some engagements in the past with Muslim parties like the Welfare Party of India, as well as Jamaat-e-Islami linked groups. But of course, the single largest Muslim party that they've had almost an uninterrupted alliance with for a number of years now, the biggest Muslim party in Kerala, is the IUML. But with these other parties, it has largely remained either issue-specific or region-specific. In the 2020 December local body elections 5 years ago, the Welfare Party of India, which was widely regarded as the political outfit of the Jamaat-e-Islami, made some electoral gains. The WPI won 3 seats in Mukkam, while the UDF-WPI alliance secured 15 seats overall. In Kodiyatur, which is a left-ruled Grama Panchayat, it was wrested by the UDF with the support of 2 WPI members. In Malappuram, the UDF captured 2 Gram Panchayats with WPI backing. And just ahead of last year, in fact 2024 Lok Sabha elections, the Kerala unit of the WPI publicly announced its support for the Congress-led UDF. That declaration was made openly, but it did not amount to a formal statewide alliance or any kind of seat-sharing agreement. Notably, during that same period, the Congress declined support from the SDPI, drawing a distinction between the WPI and the SDPI. During the Nilambur by-election last year in June 2025, the Jamaat-e-Islami once again extended its support to the UDF. As before, this was a public declaration of support, not a formal electoral alliance. In the December 2025 local body elections in Malappuram, the UDF entered into a seat-sharing agreement with the WPI. While the support was publicly acknowledged, the Congress maintained that this was not a formal statewide alliance.
State leader made a statement against the UDF that he said if the UDF comes to power, the Jamaat-e-Islami will control the home portfolio. That is the beginning of a hate campaign initiated by the CPM.
Growing influence of parties and organizations like the Jamaat and the formalized alliances that Jamaat-e-Islami is having with political parties like the Indian Union Muslim League, which are in effect controlling the Congress, are a matter of concern for every Malayali.
And now to some international news. Now, US President Donald Trump has been emboldened by the Venezuela operation in which he ousted the Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. In fact, extricated him from Venezuela and brought him all the way to New York to stand trial. Now he's going after Venezuelan oil tankers. In this case, there were 2 of them. One of them happened to change their flag to a Russian flag. One was apprehended off the coast of Venezuela. The other was apprehended off the coast of the Arctic Sea. So why is Trump going after these Russian or Venezuelan oil tankers, one off the coast of Venezuela, the other off the Arctic Sea? What message is he ultimately trying to send to Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia? After the capture of former Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, Trump is now explicitly saying to the rest of the world, he's used as many words to say this, that the Western Hemisphere happens to be that of America and no one else will be allowed to do business without America's terms and conditions in the Western Hemisphere. He now says that America will control the flow of oil in Venezuela, who it sells that oil to, at what price it sells, what are the price caps, and what are going to be the terms and conditions of that oil trade. Trump wants Venezuela, which has the world's largest known reserves of crude at over 300 billion barrels. Trump has said again in as many words just a couple of days ago that he expects Venezuela to literally surrender anywhere between 30 to 50 million barrels to America. That would be roughly worth anywhere between $3 to $5 billion. And if that were to happen, and it likely will, maybe not immediately, but certainly once America takes control of what is a state-owned petroleum sector in Venezuela, then that would immediately crash the price of global oil. Right now, it's about $70 a barrel. It could come down to $50 a barrel. And that seems to be Trump's strategy, because if oil goes from $70 to $50, then the biggest loser in all of this will be Vladimir Putin, because his war machine, his ongoing almost 4-year war in Ukraine, depends heavily on the export of Russian oil. That also explains why Trump is targeting countries like India, China, and Brazil. He has reportedly now given the green light to a bill in the US Congress which threatens to raise Russian oil sanctions to 500%. He's hoping that all of this will put pressure on Vladimir Putin into declaring an end to the Ukraine war, which so far he's been holding off on.
This is not business as usual with Moscow. For the first time in years, the United States has forcibly taken control of a Russian-flagged oil tanker on the high seas. It happened in the shadow of the Venezuela invasion, with Russian military assets nearby, and it raises a big question. Why is Donald Trump taking on Vladimir Putin now? U.S. authorities say it was part of a shadow network moving sanctioned oil linked to Venezuela, Iran, and Russia. After weeks of pursuit, U.S. forces boarded the vessel in the North Atlantic between Iceland and the British Isles. The tanker had refused boarding in the Caribbean. It changed course, name and flag mid-voyage. This was not a snap decision. U.S. forces tracked the Marinera for nearly 2 weeks through storms. Dark zones where tracking data vanished. The Coast Guard tried to board it once. The ship allegedly fled. On Wednesday, special forces finally moved in. Helicopters overhead and judicial seizure warrant in hand. The tanker was taken without shots fired.
I believe you're referring to the Bella 1 tanker that was seized this morning. The Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security, in coordination with the Department of War, did announce that seizure this morning for violations of U.S. sanctions. I've spoken about the enforcement of our sanctions policy at the podium prior to the new year, and this administration is going to fully enforce the sanction policy of the United States.
Russian military assets were nearby. A submarine, naval vessels in the general vicinity. There was no confrontation, but Moscow was present, and U.S. went ahead anyway. Russian lawmakers later called the seizure piracy. The transport ministry said all contact with the vessel was lost after boarding. The U.S. says the ship had no valid flag. Officials argue the tanker flew false flags and tried to switch registration mid-voyage without due process. Under maritime law, a stateless vessel can be boarded. The White House says the Marinera met that test, and it had a U.S. federal court warrant attached. Washington says the crew could face prosecution.
Step one is the stabilization of the country. We don't want it descending into chaos. Part of that stabilization, and the reason why we understand and believe that we have the strongest leverage possible, is our quarantine. As you've seen today, 2 more ships were seized. We are in the midst right now and in fact about to execute on a deal to take all the oil. They have oil that is stuck in Venezuela. They can't move it because of our quarantine and because it's sanctioned. We are going to take between 30 and 50 million barrels of oil. We're going to sell it in the marketplace at market rates, not at the discounts Venezuela was getting. That money will then be handled in such a way that we will control how it is dispersed in a way that benefits the Venezuelan people, not corruption, not the regime.
Russia rejects that outright. It says the tanker was granted temporary permission to sail under the Russian flag on Christmas Eve. Under the UN law of the sea, Moscow argues that no state can use force against a properly registered vessel on the high seas. Russia is demanding the return of its nationals aboard the ship, and it says the seizure violates international law.
Незаконное формирование, это корабль, если вот брал Марина, это корабль береговой охраны США. Причем где береговая охрана, где берег и где тысячи миль. Он шел 2 недели.
The Marinera was not alone. Within hours, U.S. forces boarded another tanker. the Panama-flagged supertanker M. Sofia in the Caribbean. That ship was carrying Venezuelan crude. Its transponder was off and its route masked. U.S. officials call it part of the same ghost fleet. It was the fourth tanker seizure in recent weeks. This is where Russia enters the picture. The tanker flew a Russian flag. Russian vessels were nearby and Moscow is already under oil pressure because of Ukraine. At the same time, Trump has greenlit a bipartisan bill to sanction countries buying Russian oil. Oil is the backbone of Putin's war economy. This seizure lands straight on that pressure point. Trump is reshaping oil flows. He says the U.S. will control Venezuelan oil sales, control the revenue, control who gets paid. He says Venezuela can sell oil only if it serves American interests. That stance threatens China, Venezuela's biggest buyer. Beijing has already called it bullying. But why is Trump taking on Putin now? Because oil is leverage and Venezuela sits at the center of that fight. And because Trump believes pressure works better than restraint. The risk is quite obvious. One tanker or miscalculation can lead to confrontation at sea. Trump has long claimed he has a good relationship with Vladimir Putin. This move tells a different story. The U.S. is now willing to enforce sanctions anywhere in the world, against any flag, even with Russian military assets nearby. The U.S. has time and again proven that this is about control of energy, supply chains, and showing who sets the rules.
It certainly is about the control of energy supply chains, particularly about Russian oil. So it's not just the seizing of the Russian oil tankers, but US President Donald Trump has also now given the green light for a bill that will likely be brought up before the US Congress as early as next week. This bill, which has been moved by Trump acolyte and Senator from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, aims to punish countries like India, China, and Brazil, who are big importers of Russian oil. Graham's bill threatens tariffs on countries like India as high as 500% for importing Russian oil. Now, while this might just be a negotiating tactic, this bill might not actually pass through either house of the US Congress, because clearly, certainly in the House, more than in the Senate, it might not muster enough votes to pass and put 500% tariffs on countries like India, Brazil, or China. It is absolutely clear as daylight, that Trump is using Russian oil as a bit of a bargaining chip. Remember, earlier, back in August, Trump had imposed and slapped 25% oil tariffs on India, specifically for importing Russian oil, while at the same time exempting China, even though China imports a hell of a lot more Russian oil than India does. In fact, India was the only country in the world, even though a lot of others import Russian oil, India was the only country in the world which was singled out for this 25% additional oil tariff. He also made it a point to say how India was trying hard to let him know how much India had cut purchase of Russian oil in these last few months. But again, that is an inaccuracy, that is Trump hyperbole, because the data on the ground shows that India, contrary to cutting Russian oil, has actually imported more Russian oil in the month of November compared to previous months. So why then is Trump indulging in this grandstanding that India is cutting Russian oil just to please him?
I was at the Indian ambassador's house about a month ago, and all he wanted to talk about is how they're buying less Russian oil. Would you tell the president to relieve the tariff? This stuff works.
So that's the Senator, Lindsey Graham, whose bill will now be taken up by the US Congress next week. But does this really work? Because there's no evidence to show that seizing oil tankers will stop Putin from continuing the war in Ukraine, or imposing tariffs will stop countries like India from importing Russian oil. Kurt Volker is a former US ambassador to NATO, also a special representative to Ukraine. Why does Trump believe in going after these Russian-flagged oil tankers, especially after the capture of Maduro and taking control of the oil assets in Venezuela? What kind of message is he trying to send, particularly to Vladimir Putin?
Yes, I think that's basically the point, that President Trump and the U.S. administration want to demonstrate that the U.S. has a claim to a special dominance in the Western Hemisphere. Like the Monroe Doctrine of the 1800s, they're now saying that there's the Donroe Doctrine, as Donald Trump is calling it, which is to say the U.S. will decide and the U.S. will control this. And so they want to make sure they seize these Venezuelan tankers in order to demonstrate that the U.S. is in charge here about what happens to Venezuelan oil. And then they want to use that leverage to negotiate with the leadership in Venezuela about the terms and the destinations and the usage of that Venezuelan oil. And on offer from the U.S. at the same time to Venezuela is billions of dollars of investment from U.S. energy companies to ramp up Venezuela's oil production again, which would benefit the country. But they want to make sure that this is all under U.S.
But
control.
Ambassador Volker, here's the thing. The Donroe Doctrine, which basically is Trump's way of saying that, look, this is my backyard, the Western Hemisphere is my backyard, and I set the rules here. That same logic can be applied to a Putin doctrine, and Putin can use that to justify his continuing war in Ukraine. Xi Jinping can use the same logic and use that to attack Taiwan. So what's stopping those countries from using the same logic that underpins the Donroe Doctrine?
Yeah, absolutely nothing. And that is the problem with us. By claiming a U.S. sphere of influence like that, we are indeed legitimizing and even encouraging China and Russia to do the same. And I think it is a huge mistake, strategic mistake, to give those dictators arguments in favor of dominating their smaller neighbors. I think it's a very short-sighted and self-centered policy.
The other thing that Trump has done, reportedly, is give a green light to this bill that's been moved by his friend and Senator from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, which talks about imposing 500% tariffs on countries like India, Brazil, and China for importing Russian oil. Over the last 3-4 months, since August, India has been singled out for the 25% additional oil tariffs, the only country in the world that's facing that. And yet there is no evidence to show that imposing tariffs, oil tariffs on India, is changing India's behavior in a way that it reduces import of Russian oil. If anything, in the month of November, India imported 7.7 million barrels of Russian oil, which is 35% of all of India's oil imports. So again, there is simply no evidence to show that this strategy of oil tariffs is working. It's having the opposite effect.
No, it's not working. And anyone who knows India well would not expect it to work. India does not respond well to threats and pressure, but it does respond well to engagement and partnership. So I think that we have mishandled this with India. Also, the issue of tariffs is, I think, the wrong way to go about trying to pressure Russia indirectly through other players. I agree with the idea of secondary sanctions, where if we work with governments and say we think that we should be starving the Kremlin of finances for its war effort, which is what all this money goes toward, we can agree on a policy and we can sanction companies, not the whole government, not the entire people of India, but companies that would be involved in buying and selling and trading in Russian oil and gas. And I think that would be a far more effective way to go rather than tariffs.
All right, Ambassador Kurt Volker, thank you very much for joining us. We'll catch you again tomorrow night, same time.